So the test server changes have been out for a couple days now. I think most people have read the patch notes, have read all the changes, have discussed, have made their opinion on every single change, most likely. But I think it's time to have a little talk because there's a lot of sentiments going around with the community, whether it's about the game in general or about the changes specifically. And I don't always necessarily agree with a lot of them. So I'm hoping this to be some type of discussion video. I know my channel is pretty small and I don't expect a lot of people to watch this, but if anybody here wants to talk about it, if you have a different opinion or the same, or we just want to talk in the comments, or you can hit me up on Discord, I would just be great. Don't hesitate. So yeah, I really want to talk about this because there's some very controversial changes, some very innovative changes in a way. Like, this is the first time I see this sort of changes in my time playing, and it's been about 2 years, a little more maybe. So personally, I'm quite excited, and I actually really like a lot of the changes, whereas most people really dislike them. So the hot topic is obviously gonna be Cypher Rush, the changes to the Cypher speed. So I'm probably gonna be too lazy to edit the changes inside the video, so I'll probably put a link in the description with a Reddit post with all the changes. So if you're not like fully aware of all the values, I don't think it's a huge problem, but I just want to talk about the general idea. People have been asking for Cypher Rush nerf ever since this game is. Ever since I've played this game, I've seen the consensus that the game is survivor sided, that and that Cypher Rush is problematic, and that it needs a nerf. It's in need of a nerf. And I just have to say I don't agree. I don't necessarily agree. First off, if we look at purely data and statistical like evidence, I think it's clear that hunters are usually on the higher end of the win rate spectrum. Like, it's very rare to see a hunter with a win rate lower than 50%. Usually it's around 60, 70, some will go as high as 80, 90. And most survivor player on the opposite end of the spectrum will have win rates lower than 50. And some will have win rates over 50, but I really don't see a lot of them. And even in the, people will say, oh, but in the high tiers it's survivor sided. It's still not really. Like, there are some very, very strong hunters in the high tiers that just destroy everything on their way. And a lot of good survivors still struggle because of solo queue, because of duo queue. And I really don't think that in the measure that you want to say that the game should be balanced, this game is not survivor sided to the point where we need to change the fundamental core of the game and nerf it strictly. Because let's face it, ciphers are literally the base of the game. Like, the entire winning condition for survivor is doing the ciphers. There's nothing else. Like kiting, it's only like buying time to do the ciphers. And if survivors are not winning that much, then where is the incentive that Cypher Rush is problematic? Because if it truly were problematic, then perhaps survivors would be winning a lot more, hunters would be struggling a lot more, it would feel unfair. And I just don't think it does, because you could say that survivors have a lot of bullshit, but when I look at hunters, there's also a lot of bullshit, but people don't seem to mention it. Like, I'm sorry, but if you main Dream Witch, if you main Breaking Wheel, if you main Geisha, Sculptor, Naiad, and Photographer, etc., like, I don't think you have any room to complain, because your characters have their bullshit of their own, and I don't think that in terms of balance in itself, you have the right to say that the game needs a drastic Cypher Rush nerf. Now, while I do say that, I do think it's possible that the game should not be balanced around 50% win rate for both sides. There's a possibility that, considering this is an asymmetrical game, the will of the community might go against this idea of perfectly balanced game, and the community might want the game to actually be hunter-sided. But while I have a lot of interesting theories on the topic, I really don't want to digress too much in this video because I've tried recording it multiple times and it ended up at like 20-30 minutes. So if people are interested in the debate of the Cypher Rush need a nerf, I would be very interested in making a separate video on it. But right now I just want to look at the changes themselves. Because why do people hate the changes? Because people want a Cypher Rush nerf. But is this a Cypher Rush nerf? No, this is a Cypher adjustment, a Cypher rework. And it's funny because while I will argue that Cypher Rush does not need a nerf, people are mad that this adjustment might actually be a buff to Cypher Rush. I'm actually going to argue that it isn't, that it actually is a Cypher Rush nerf by a long shot. So the first change is the Cypher speed is being reduced at the start of the game, and that is for the first 100 seconds of the game. Currently I believe a Cypher takes 81 seconds to be completed, and that reduction in speed adds like something like 7 seconds, so around 88 seconds in the first 100 seconds of the game. And I think people really underestimate the value of this change when it comes to how much of a nerf to Cypher Rush this is. The early game in a 995 match is extremely critical. It sets the pace of the match. It will often be what determines who wins between the survivor and the hunter. And having those extra 7 seconds on the first 3 ciphers, because this is when the most ciphers are being done. 3 whole ciphers are going to be done during the first kite, so during those first 100 seconds. It's just a huge nerf, because 3 out of 5 ciphers is more than half of the ciphers. And even if, when you look at the changes, yes, the decode speed does ramp up a lot as the match progresses, but is it really going to be that significant? Because as you get into the later part of the matches, there's only going to be 1 cipher, maybe 2, that needs to be decoded. And because of the change that makes it slower in the beginning, I really do think that it balances out, maybe even in favor of the hunter. Because when you look at the early game, the whole purpose of the first kite is that the first kiter needs to kite as long as possible. If they can manage to kite 3 ciphers, this is just an amazing position for the survivor. Because how can a hunter win the game and like snowball the game into their favor? It's by getting quick kills, by having quick chases that lead to survivors needing to stop the coding because they have to 1, rescue, 2, they need to support the kiter, and that slows down the ciphers. Every time a rescuer has to leave their cipher to rescue, that's 1 less person that's decoding. That's 1 less person that is not able to pop the cipher. When you look at forward players, they really come to teach me how important it is to actually finish a cipher. Because when you look at the rescuers that decode extremely slowly, especially at the beginning of the match, they're gonna take a while to finish their first cipher. But there's a reason why forward players like to have a mercenary in their team. It's because they want to finish their first cipher they need to make sure that their first cipher that they're decoding at the beginning is completed. Because you can have as much progress as you want on a cipher, as long as it's not done, it does not count towards the objective, which is 5 ciphers done. And if the forward leaves his cipher and leaves it at 70-80% and starts harassing the whole match and ends up never going back to that cipher to pop it, it's going to be a huge waste of time, because then another teammate has to come and pop that cipher. But if the cipher is done, then the teammates can focus on other ciphers, and that promotes cipher rush a lot. So adding these seconds to the first 3 ciphers is huge, because it's gonna make a whole difference on the rescuer not having a prime cipher, or having a completed cipher when they move in for the rescue. And I think that's really going to help a lot of hunters who have a very bad chase at the beginning of the match, like Hallamber, like Mad Eyes. And yes, you could argue that a lot of these hunters are going to struggle a bit in the end game, because they rely a lot of end game snowball because of the cipher rush accelerating. But I really don't think that's such a bad thing. Yes, I do think that hunters like Mad Eyes, like Undead, maybe Photographer will hurt a bit in their strength because of the overall adjustment, because these hunters really prefer the endgame scenarios where they're able to hard pressure the ciphers and limit the decoding. But when you look at hunters like Breaking Wheel, like Dream Witch, they are very strong, and they really do need to be a little more weak, I believe. So is it really that bad that these hunters are getting a bit hurt compared to the others? No, I really don't think so. Mad Eyes can get a buff, I hope. Yeah, that's kind of wishful thinking. I hope he does get something, because I really do think he's gonna get hurt a bit. Other than that, I don't think that these hunters being a bit worse is gonna be too bad, because people usually don't like them. But overall, with the rest of the hunters, I really think that the strengthening of the early game is gonna outweigh their pressure being a bit worse. Like, I think the purpose of this adjustment is to make it so survivors that are in a really bad position because their teammates couldn't kite, because they got stuffed on the rescue, is it so they don't give up, because the more the match lasts, they are actually still able to pop these ciphers very quickly, and they could actually dream of maybe finishing these ciphers even if there's a lot of them left and there's a few teammates dead. And I think that's what the devs are aiming for by doing this change, and I really like it, because a lot of the changes seem to translate the will from the devs to make the game better, and I'm going to explain a little bit about that. So what do I mean by making the game better? So I've said I don't think that Cypher Rush is an issue and that it needs a change necessarily. While I do agree with what the devs have done to the ciphers right now on the test server, so I do think that's really good change. To me, one of the most frustrating parts of this game has got to be the early game and the randomness of it. When you look at an ID85 match, like, people really like to boast about their win or their loss or their tie or whatever, and they're so happy to get their rank points at the end. But personally, I really don't care about the outcome of a match. Well, I've come to learn not to care, because in the end, I do think that whether you win, lose or not, it's determined a lot by RNG, by randomness. Like, the discrepancy of the outcome of a match between where the hunter spawns on top of the mercenary, or if the hunter spawns on top of the mechanic or the prisoner, because mechanic doesn't care. It's so huge, and ID85 players don't realize that whether the match is a win or a loss, like, it's so much is determined by randomness, by RNG, and that's so frustrating when you're somebody that plays for the win, that plays for, you know, getting rank points by grinding. And to me, that has been a huge issue with the game, and especially when it comes to characters like decoders. I've always voiced my hatred for decoders because their inherent value as a character is literally only regarding whether or not they spawn on top of the hunter or not. Like 1 out of 4 chances you spawn on top of the hunter, well, you're useless. 3 out of 4 chances you're super useful. Well, not 3 out of 4 because the hunter will usually search around for the decoder a bit, but you get the idea. I don't think decoders are healthy for the game because their value that they bring to the game, it doesn't take any. It's not interesting. It's just whether you spawn near the hunter or not. It's all luck. There's no really skill involved. Because when you look at a rescuer, people really hate rescuer, but I do think rescuers are healthy for the meta. Because when you look at forward, like mercenary, instead of saying, okay, I have a decode buff, but if I spawn on top of the hunter, well, we lose. No, they're saying that, okay, I have a decode debuff, so I'm penalizing my team 100% of the time, unless I'm being chased, but the odds are lower than not being found. And so I have a decode debuff and I need to make myself worth it. I need to make sure that this decode debuff is actually compensated by my presence in the game. And to do that, you have to use your skill, you have to use your abilities to make this character with a decode debuff worth it over another character that would have decoded faster. But decoders, their value is literally just sitting on the cipher and praying they don't get found. And to me that is a huge issue with the game health, with the game interest, but I really don't see people caring that much about it, and it makes me a bit sad. But the devs, like, this is making me so happy because it really does seem that they understand the issue. And I think that's where the new spawn system comes from. Now obviously I can't read the minds of the devs, I don't know why they made the changes, but I really do think that with all the changes in this patch, it's very coherent that they want to make the early game more consistent, more fair, less frustrating for the hunter. And that's where this new system comes from. So for those of you that do know what the new system does, you have the 4 survivors, they have to pick an area where they spawn. Then the hunter picks his own area, knowing which areas are taken already by survivors. And then once they both chosen, the hunter is able to see where each survivor is, like their characters. So the hunter will always know where the decoder is. And I think that's extremely good change, because then decoders, like, their value is no longer. Their value is just, oh well, the hunter was unfortunate enough to spawn the furthest away from me. Now the decoder can strategize where to spawn, but the hunter can also say, well, I know where you spawn and I can chase you. But if the decoder actually has a strategy, puts himself or themselves in the strongest area, then they can actually still fight back. And I know a lot of hunter players are gonna dislike this change because, oh well, now the decoder can spawn in hospital every time, they can spawn in big boat. And yes, that is an issue sometimes, but to me, having that over the inconsistency of the old system, I would rather have a more consistent system that favors the survivor a little bit more, because that just makes the experience a lot more interesting, a lot more fair, in my opinion. And I also want to say that this change in itself is actually not that bad for hunters, because here's the thing, you have 9 squares on the map. The survivors will take 4 of those. So I'm curious to see what the strategies are gonna be with especially like organized team comps using this system. But for example, one of the strategies I thought of was to put the weak link, like I'm gonna say decoder, but a lot of team comps are not gonna have a decoder, but whoever is the most favorable target for the hunter, put them in the far corner of the map and then have the 3 others like surround them. That way the hunter has no way to spawn on top of them. So I think that could be a strategy, but that means that all 4 survivors are in one corner of the map. And usually as survivor it's better to spread out over the ciphers, because then your cipher rush is better, and then you're not in a 3 cipher situation when there's 1 cipher remaining. So the survivors are actually going to have to rotate a lot, and in the end the decoder or the weak link is not necessarily that much protected. And for example, when you look at Hospital, one of the strongest areas in the game, which by the way is getting a shadow nerf, because when you look at the end of the patch notes, they're actually reducing the fall down animation for like most of the hunters, and that is huge. That's going to make Hospital so much more bearable. But I digress. If the decoder spawns in Hospital, there's absolutely no way for the survivors to make sure that the hunter cannot spawn next to that decoder. So I really do think that this new system is going to bring a very interesting depth to the game, and I'm really excited. I'm really looking forward to it. And even if in the end it ends up favoring one of the factions that people don't really want it to favor, this can still get changed. I think the devs realize that this is a lot of changes, and that they're going to be looking out for, you know, some of the issues once they're released, and that's also why the test server is there. We may see some changes in the test server, but I do think the devs are going to monitor it, and in like a few months we're going to have a system that works well, that people are happy with, and where people do know the strategies, and it actually comes out pretty balanced. So to me that was the biggest issue for the hunter side. Now I'm gonna talk about, my opinion, the biggest issue with the survivor side, and that is well, solo queue in general, but even when you queue with other people, your match, the outcome of the match, the points, the rank points you will get, are too much dependent on your teammates, and that is bad because it really discourages solo queuers. It really discourages people from playing the game from a more casual perspective, because they really have to worry about them being as strong as possible in order to compensate for their possible teammates' mistakes. And to me that's why one of the reasons that when you look at survivor players, they're more often playing meta than hunters. Hunters really do love to play strong brain-dead hunters. They're usually the most popular hunters, like Photographer, like Nayad, like Blood Queen, like Geisha. I mean, that's a bit of a hot take on my part, but you choose to ignore it if you want. But when you look at survivors, there's always a merc in my match, like 90%. If I don't ban priestess, there's almost always going to be a priestess. It's very rare to see non-meta as survivors, and I think that's one of the biggest reasons. It's because of the inconsistency of the survivor, the power of the survivor team based on lack of communication, based on randoms, etc. And I do think that a lot of these changes in the patch notes are also a way from the devs to address this. Now I'm gonna be going back a little bit on the cipher change, but I do think that this idea of the ciphers ramping up in speed in the late game, it's also geared towards survivors that are in a very bad position because their teammates couldn't kite long because there was a stuff rescue. And to me, like, I'm not a survivor main, but when I do play survivor, I often solo queue, and it's very annoying when the match is really bad for you, and the hunter is clearly gonna win, but you're stuck because you're one of the 2 people alive or something. and you have to wait for the hunter to inevitably kill you. But I do think that this change is supposed to say, but look, now the ciphers are actually extremely fast now that you've managed to read this stage of the game. You can still fight back and still try to at least get the ciphers done and maybe get one person or maybe two people through the exit gate. And I do think that's important because a lot of the time as hunter, the match is the outcome of a match is already decided very early on, and I think this gives a big reason for people who have been put in a very bad position because of their teammates or because of for whatever reason. I don't want to say that I don't like this mentality that it's always because of teammates, but whatever. To always give survivors a reason to still try to at least do some ciphers, no matter how bad this looks. And why do I think that they're trying to address this? Because of another change. There's a huge list of additional points that solo queuers can get for certain actions that they perform, even when the outcome of the match is a draw or a loss. And I really do think that all of these changes are trying to address survivors who solo queue and stuff like that. Like, for example, they also reduced the quick message cooldown to 7 seconds. I think that's also a change made to cater to solo queue players. And I do think that it's important because especially like one of the main reasons I don't agree with nerfing Cypher Rush is that there's a lot of solo queue players and it's already very hard for them to even win with randoms with all the strong hunters out there, and I think this makes it a little more fair. It's obviously not possible to make solo queuers like be balanced, because then you would make comp teams extremely strong. They're already pretty strong, but they don't make up a lot of the population. Like even in the high tiers where you're only allowed to duo, survivors don't dominate that much. But I do think that this is a very good change for solo queue, and the devs are really trying to address that. So I've talked for a while, so I think I've said most of what I wanted to say regarding the two main changes. But other than that, there's a lot of smaller changes, like a magician buff, which as a very long time magician main I'm really excited for, but on the other side I'm still a hunter main, so I'm probably gonna complain a little bit about it, but we'll see about that. Acrobat's getting a very insignificant nerf that he does deserve. Other than that, lots of minor good changes to the game, and I think that's about it. So if you've made it this far into the video, I have to say I appreciate you. I don't expect this video to be watched by many people. My channel is kind of dead. It's never been big, so. But I will say, if you enjoyed what I had to say, if you've enjoyed like the points I brought up, I would really appreciate it if you could share the video around. Once again, it's not for my channel. I don't really care for views and stuff, but since I really do want this to be a discussion type of video, I think it would be nice the more people participate, because personally I do think these changes are going to have a huge impact on the game, and it's important to discuss it so that as a community we can be more aware and we can make smart decisions on how we want to think about the game. And yeah, so please let me know what you thought in the comment section, and I think that's gonna be about it for today.